You're tuned in to Around the Lens, the internet's only live streaming roundtable discussion podcast, featuring Zach Roberts, Ron Hamilton, Travis Keys, and your host, David J. Murphy. Hello and welcome to Around the Lens, episode 163. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Joining me as always is my co-host, Ron Hamilton. Hello, Ron. Oh, boy. How you doing, buddy? You haven't heard from me in a few weeks. Hold on. Let's do that again. Hello and welcome. I start from the beginning. Sorry for anybody who was listening. All right. Hello and welcome to episode. Hello and episode. Oh, man. Oh, jeez. Okay. Hello and welcome to episode 163 of Around the Lens. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Ron Hamilton. Hello, Ron. How are you doing tonight?
Aloha from Hawaii, where the weather is warm and so is my heart.
You're a little hot, but that's okay. Maybe you can fix that later. Anyways, what you been up to, man? What you been up to those last few weeks? Haven't seen you on the show.
Apologize, I have missed the past 3 episodes of Around the Lens, and I'm sure our loyal fans have been lamenting the fact I've not been here. But sometimes in Hawaii, we do something, I don't know what the term is in the mainland, but here sometimes we have to work and keep me from getting on the show. We broadcast at 4 p.m. at local time here, and it's a little hard to make it sometimes. Now
that work, is that a Hawaiian word? I know you guys got all kinds of weird words in Hawaiian.
Pigeon, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not heard it before. All right, well, glad to have you back, buddy, and love your T-shirt. You want to show the audience your T-shirt?
You can pick these up on the Around the Lens website. If you'd like to show your support for Around the Lens. You don't have to be a Patreon follower like some people are. You can also support us by buying merchandise, such as this lovely T-shirt you see me wearing here.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad you mentioned Patreon, because we do have a Patreon. In case you didn't know, we had our first actual Patreon. I'd like to say congrats, or thank you, I should say, to our first Patreon. Of course, Ron was technically our first Patreon. He actually gave us $1 a month to start out with. So we do appreciate your patronage, Ron, your obligation and also commitment to the show. But I'd like to thank Timothy Floyd for becoming a patron and donating some money to us. I really appreciate that. And I just want you to know, Timothy, if you're listening or watching, that money will be going straight to paying for the hosting fees that go into hosting the website. So I do appreciate that. And anyone who would like to contribute to the show, we greatly appreciate it. So thank you all. Anyways, let's get on with the show. We've got a great guest for you tonight. I'd like to welcome to the show Loren Elliott. Loren, can you tell the audience a little about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm a freelance photojournalist based in Houston, Texas. I mostly cover immigration, politics, breaking news, a little bit of sports, some portraiture. I guess I'm sort of all over the board. I do quite a bit of work for the wire services, so Reuters, Agency France Press, Getty, as well as some work for national papers like the Times and the Post and the Journal.
Nice. Well, welcome. And you're based out of Houston, right?
That's right.
Cool. And before that, you were in Tampa, you said, and that was your first job out of college, I presume, or what was your career before that?
My past's been a little bit less than traditional. I did undergraduate studies in the environmental field, graduated college with very little clue as to what I wanted to do, moved back to California and worked as a fishing guide to pay off my undergraduate loans. And then when I decided I wanted to pursue photojournalism, I went to the University of Missouri to their graduate program. And I did 2 semesters of school there to learn the basics, bounced around with a few internships, and then landed in Tampa with my first job as a staff photographer at the Tampa Bay Times.
Nice. And how long were you with Tampa?
I guess, let's see, that would have been the summer of 2016 until the beginning of, maybe it was 2015. I think it was about 3 years, give or take, total. I started as an intern, and then it turned into a full-time staff gig.
How has the transition from sort of the, more structured, you know when you're going to get your paycheck, everything's sort of, you got health insurance and all that, sort of staffer life, to more of the freelance a little bit, has it been scary, or have you embraced it?
Both. It's been
Scary
scary,
embrace
but I
sounds
think
like,
yeah, yeah. I think that the biggest challenge has been planning out a personal life. Anytime I make any sort of plans with friends now, or try and plan a vacation, there's always that caveat that I might have to bail last minute if a big story breaks and it's something that I just can't say no to.
Right.
That's something that I just didn't really have to deal with at the newspaper. I could put vacation days on the calendar a month or 2 months out, and I was going. And I mean, now as my own boss, I mean, in theory, I can do that and pass up stories. But when there's a really big story as a freelancer, you don't want to miss that. And unlike working as a staffer where I'm still getting paid when I'm on vacation, if I pass up a big story as a freelancer, I'm not getting paid. So I think that that's been the biggest hurdle for me.
Have there been any sort of those assignments that happen at the last minute, or you had to like kind of drop all your plans and kind of get to, and was it like worth all that, or were you like, man, I wish I had kept up with my plans, with my friends?
Yeah. I mean, it feels sort of like Murphy's Law that I'll be twiddling my thumbs in Houston without any work, and then I'll have plans to leave on a vacation, and that's when news breaks. Last year, I had a vacation planned with a buddy to go to Mexico, and the day before I was set to depart, I got a call from an editor about an immigration-related story that was exactly the sort of story that I really made this jump to freelancing in Texas to do.
Right.
The sort of story I couldn't really say no to. It was a phenomenal opportunity. So I delayed my trip by a couple of days, ran out to New Mexico, did 2 days of work, hurried back to Houston, and then ended up at the airport flying out. And that's when the Santa Fe school shooting tragically happened near Houston. And then my phone was blowing up again. And at that point, I decided that I'd already delayed the trip, and having covered a mass shooting before in Florida, I covered the Pulse shooting, knowing just how much of an emotional toll that takes. I decided that I was gonna turn those calls down and just continue with my trip at that point. And I ended up having to cover the aftermath of the Santa Fe school shooting in Houston once I got home anyways for another week or so. And a week of that was honestly enough. I mean, that stuff is just so heavy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned immigration as a sort of a topic that you cover, and I was looking at your work, and obviously it seems to be one of the biggest pieces of your work, and being in Houston, or being in Texas in general. I mean, I can't imagine another state that, besides maybe like California, where you can really cover the immigration debate, or the immigration in general. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and sort of how you've covered the topic. But before we do, I want to talk about your photograph that was featured here on the CNN Top 100, and I'm going to bring it up for people who are watching the show. So we're looking here at a photograph. I'll read the caption really quick. A U.S. Border Patrol agent apprehends an undocumented immigrant near McAllen, Texas. And this was part of the Inside the Border Crisis photos from the front lines. So again, this is a photograph of a border agent apprehending an immigrant, or I guess we would say, well, we'll say immigrant, undocumented immigrant, in this like tall grass, or I don't know what you would call what was
Sugarcane fields.
Sugarcane fields. Okay, I knew it was some sort of plant of some kind. So why don't you go ahead and tell us the story behind this photograph?
I made that picture on assignment for Agency France Press. I was doing an embed with U.S. Customs and Border Protection in a Black Hawk helicopter. And with those embeds, you go up in the air with them, and if they'll open up the doors for you, you get a clean shot. That day, it was especially windy, and so they wouldn't open up the door. So I was shooting through a window, which makes it really challenging.
This looks especially clear for shooting through a window, let me just say.
I
think they must have put a little Windex on the windows that day.
Yeah, that's more a result of them cleaning their windows than anything that I was doing right on my side. But most of the aerial photography I'd done from helicopters in the past was going up in helicopters that were being chartered specifically so that I, as a photojournalist, could photograph something. And so this experience is very different because embedded as a journalist with CBP. I'm just there along for the ride. They're carrying out their daily operations, and I get a seat in the back, but they're not doing anything for me. So on that particular embed, I was switching between puking my guts out and making pictures the whole time, because I'd never been in one of those Black Hawk helicopters before, and the ways in which they maneuver them are intense, to say the least. They're going down on both sides. They are spinning, and they're using the helicopters in tactical ways in order to aid the Border Patrol agents on the ground who are attempting to apprehend immigrants. So they'll use those helicopters with the rudder wash to try and spread those leaves open in order to try and locate immigrants who are hiding at that point. So I mean, being up in the air, it's a very, very different perspective than being embedded with Border Patrol agents on the ground.
Yeah, I was thinking when you talked about, obviously, your experiences, the only time I've ever been sick on aircraft is when I was flying in a military aircraft, and they did one of those maneuvers where they dropped from a super high distance and spun around, dropped all the way to the ground, like super fast. And that was, nope, couldn't do it. Couldn't hold it in after that. So I definitely feel your pain there. So you were shooting with the Border Patrol, you were embedded with them, and was this one of many shots that you got of, undocumented immigrants being detained, or was this kind of like you went the whole day and you got this one? Like, again, sometimes you're with these folks and you see stuff all the time. Sometimes it's just boring and little bits of stuff happen. On
that particular embed, we were up in the air for, I want to say, about 4 hours or so. Wow. And I think that there were 2 or 3 groups of immigrants who were apprehended with the help of the helicopter. So I made a handful of images that day, but not a ton. I mean, I think that was certainly the strongest image of that day to speak to that story. Yeah.
And what did you shoot this with?
I want to say I shot that with a 300 millimeter f4 lens.
Okay. Canon or Nikon?
Canon.
Okay. Nice. What are your thoughts on this picture in general, in terms of what it means for the immigration crisis that's currently in the news all the time? Any thoughts on that? Kind of what this photo means and why you think it was chosen for this selection of photographs from 2018?
That's a weighty question. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that immigration is one of the most complex issues that we're facing right now, and to responsibly cover that as a photojournalist is something that I reflect on a lot of how can I go about photographing this issue in a way where hopefully I'm doing a service to readers and people who are seeing these images who likely will never in their lives get anywhere near the Rio Grande Valley or see any of these scenes for themselves. And so in that sense, I think that that photo, is a particularly dramatic one in a lot of ways, just because of the posture of the agent and the individual that had been apprehended. But I guess the thing I would say is that I think that there are also a lot of very quiet, subtle moments to be photographed down there that aren't as dramatic as this picture, but I think can be equally powerful. Not every picture of immigration in the Rio Grande Valley, I hope, needs to be something quite so dramatic in order to have resonance with viewers. Yeah.
No, I mean, obviously immigration has been a key focal point for the last few years, and obviously, much more so in the last year. So I think this obviously lent to that overall story that they were trying to paint in terms of things that we discussed in 2018. Talk to me about what it feels like to be selected, to have one of your images selected for this list. I mean, that must be pretty neat, right? Getting an image selected.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It's an honor, an absolute honor. The CNN photo team is fantastic. The photo editors over there in Atlanta really do great work with curating images as well as assigning work. I work for CNN from time to time as a freelancer, but when I look through that collection of images from the year and see the work that was selected, it's an honor to be included, because there's just some really, really phenomenal work by photographers that I really admire in there.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great collection for sure. Is this the first time you had your work chosen for a list like this, or have you had any of your work maybe from Tampa been chosen for any sort of lists?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't recall any of my work from Tampa being in any of these bigger pictures of the year galleries. Not a lot of that work really gets distributed the way that a picture that I might shoot for AFP or Reuters or Getty is distributed.
Right.
Some of that work for the newspaper does go to the Associated Press wire, and in that sense, it can get more national or international play. But I think that this was probably the first time that I was in one of these bigger picture of the year galleries.
Cool. Well, congratulations to you. I mean, it's definitely an honor. You should definitely be proud. So, hopefully, it won't be the last time your work is featured in an annual sort of review. And again, we talked a little bit about immigration. Like I said, it's kind of something you've been focusing a lot on. So I wanted to start, our first topic this evening, talking specifically about how you kind of got involved in photographing immigration, why you choose to kind of photograph this subject, and sort of how you cover it as a subject. So when we start with that, how did you get involved, documenting immigration? Why do you do it?
Right. Well, to back way up, so I grew up in Northern California, and having friends and community members who were immigrants, and if not undocumented themselves, then had undocumented immigrants in their family was commonplace. I was very lucky to grow up with a heck of a lot of privilege, but lived a mile and a half away from predominantly Hispanic communities, where when I was in high school, there were ICE raids happening in the middle of the night. So immigration is something that has been on my radar since a relatively young age. And I speak Spanish as well, which is pretty critical to working effectively in the Rio Grande Valley and telling the stories of immigrants in a way that does justice to the nuance of those stories. So when I was an intern at the San Francisco Chronicle, I was very lucky to get to cover some stories involving immigration out there. The one that made the biggest impression on me was a story about Hispanic workers who worked in the wine industry in the vineyards up in Sonoma County. And because of the gentrification that was occurring up there, they were no longer able to live within like an hour and a half of where they were working. Wow. And so I spent some time with a couple of families who were dealing with, how do they live within 2 hours of where they work and have rent that's affordable enough to be able to pay the bills. And then when I went to Tampa, I was able to cover some immigration stories there as well. Not only immigration stories involving immigrants from Latin America, but also I worked on a story there about a Syrian refugee family settling into Tampa in the wake of the early 2017 travel ban. And so when I made the freelance jump to Texas, I think I'd had enough primers to know that immigration is an issue that I really care about. It's one, I think that migration in general, whether it be through the lens that we're seeing it happening over the U.S.-Mexico border, or immigration that is affecting Europe. I mean, it's an issue that's going to, I think, globally continue to be at the front of headlines for myriad reasons. And so it's something that I knew I wanted to cover when I moved here. And I've been very fortunate to work for outlets and wires who've given me those opportunities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you've got a lot of great work here, and it's definitely good that they gave you those opportunities. Now, do they commission you to since you're a freelancer, are they paying for you to cover this, or are you covering it and then selling it after the fact? How does that sort of transaction work?
The first one and not the latter. I don't retroactively try and sell any work. That's not a route that I've yet. I'm either getting a call from an editor with a story, and they're sending me out on assignment, or I'm doing the research to try and figure out a unique angle for a story, and then pitching that to editors and saying, hey, is this something that you want to put me on an assignment to do? But in either case, I'm getting sent out, knowing that this is the client I'm working for. This is who's, paying to put me up at night and feed me. And at the end of the day, hopefully I'm going to produce strong work, but I don't, my pay is not tied to the number of pictures that I produce.
Right. I was going to say, like, have you or have you been identified as sort of the immigration guy? Like, do people, we want that border story, let's call up Loren, right? Or is that just, do you think, like, are you known as that within the folks who assign stuff like, we're trying to do an immigration story, let's get Loren on the phone?
I'd love to think that I'm one of the people that might be thought of as, like, a go-to immigration journalist. But that being said, there are a number of photojournalists who are doing consistently phenomenal work on the U.S.-Mexico border, both locally and from out of town. A couple of my close friends, Alana Panich-Linsman and Tamir Khalifa, are based in Austin, and they did some really, really strong work down on the border last year. Kirsten Luce and John Moore aren't based in Texas, but they both come to Texas frequently and do very strong work. So there are a number of photographers that do super strong work down there, and I guess I would say I'm lucky to consider myself one of them.
Okay, great. Well, I'm looking at some of your work here, and from what I've seen so far, you tell me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like most of your work has been on the U.S. side, or have you gone over to the other side to kind of document on that side as well?
The majority of my work has been on the U.S. side. I've done some work on the Mexico side. About maybe 3 weeks ago or so, I was doing some work in Reynosa and Matamoros. They're pretty dangerous towns to work in. The cartel presence is heavy. I don't take working in those towns lightly, especially as a freelancer, where the assurances that you might have as a staffer, I don't think are the same as a freelancer if things were to go awry, which Right. They very well could in those towns. So I worked with a very good fixer when I was in Reynosa and Matamoros, who kept myself and the reporter that I was with safe. But with the exception of that trip, most of my work, I might cross on the international bridges into Matamoros or Reynosa, but I'm not going very far into those towns just because it's not worth the risk. It's so dangerous.
Are they like targeting Americans or targeting journalists, or is it just general, being out there and general danger or general sort of risk of violence?
I think that a white journalist like myself who stands out, especially if I've got a DSLR out, I'd very much be making myself a target. So when I was working in Reynosa proper as well as Matamoros, I was working with a very small little mirrorless camera when I was out on the streets, and only getting out of the car and making pictures when the fixer who we were working with said, hey, this is an all right area for you to be out for a minute, and then I'd try and work real quickly, get back in the car, and keep moving.
Wow. What are your sort of hopes with regard to covering the immigration debate, or this sort of topic going forward? Like, are you looking for other angles to cover in it, maybe doing different types of stories, or are you just kind of going to be again covering the border as a general topic?
I'm always looking for new angles to cover the story. I think that's something that I was able to dive into a little bit towards the end of last year, after doing a whole lot of work right at the border itself. I wanted to document the limbo period that asylum seekers enter into once they're released from ICE detention, but are still awaiting future court hearings to find out what their fate's going to be and if they'll be deported back to Central America or if they'll be able to stay. So I was super fortunate that Reuters put me on assignment to cover the story of a Honduran family that was waiting in New Mexico and still is waiting in New Mexico to find out their fate. And that's that's work that I think takes a whole lot more patience. It's not necessarily as inherently visual. Doing that sort of documentary work, showing what it's like for a Honduran family to assimilate to life in New Mexico compared to being on a Border Patrol embed where, the pictures are quite dramatic. But I think that at the end of the day, it's still really important to tell the rest of the story, not just to be right at the border. So I'd love to do more work like that. I'd love to do more work in Mexico, in Tamaulipas, showing what the path is for asylum seekers coming from Central America as they're moving their way north and getting closer to the border. Definitely hopeful that I can find new angles to shed more light on immigration as a whole in that region.
Yeah, because I noticed you also have this work with Syrian refugees. So, do you find any sort of corollaries between the Syrian refugee crisis and also sort of the border crisis, or not crisis, but again, undocumented immigration and sort of do you find any corollaries there, or is it kind of two separate types of content, two separate types of stories?
I guess I'd caveat anything I say with the fact that I'm not deeply educated on the issues of immigration into Turkey and in the Mediterranean the way I feel like I am in this part of the world. But that being said, I think that there's absolutely a parallel in terms of they're both basically massive ongoing migrations of people who are facing really bleak, desperate circumstances in their home country, and therefore feel like taking immense risk to their personal safety is their best or their only option. And so even if they might die, whether it be crossing the Mediterranean and drowning or trying to cross the Rio Grande, that's a risk that they feel like they've got to take. And so in that sense, I think that there certainly is a parallel. You're seeing people in desperate circumstances trying to claw their way out of those desperate circumstances.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, let's move on to our next topic. We were trying to talk about, of course, you use Canon equipment. What's your camera of choice, by the way, right now?
I'm actually these days shooting Nikon. I've got a pair of Nikon D850s.
So were you using Canon at your staff job, and now you're using Nikon as a freelance, or you just have both sets? Okay.
No, I was always Canon at the newspaper. Yeah.
Okay. I love Canon. I came from Canon for 5D Mark II, but I've also used Nikon. You said you're using the D850?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great camera. What do you think of the mirrorless cameras, by the way, from Nikon? As any desire to move over to mirrorless?
Yeah, I think that mirrorless is for sure the way of the future. I was just out in El Paso covering Beto O'Rourke's counter rally to Trump's rally out there, and was lucky to be in the presence of a couple of incredible photographers, Carol Guzzi and Annie Leibovitz. They were both using the Nikon Z mirrorless cameras.
Okay.
So, and then I've seen a whole lot of photographers I admire, like Doug Mills shooting the Sony A9. So I think that mirrorless seems like it's definitely the future. I'm not quite ready to make the jump yet, but probably in a couple of years I will.
Yeah, wait till the Z6 Mark II or the Z7 Mark II comes out. I love what Nikon is doing with those cameras, but I'm glad that they're going mirrorless. But I don't know. For me, it's not enough for me to switch. I'm a Panasonic user myself, so I'll stick with them for right now. I'm kind of excited about the S1 and the S1R, but I brought up this story here about the widest ever 4.9mm fisheye lens. It can actually see behind itself. I thought this was pretty neat. It's never something any of us are going to use, but it kind of got my mind thinking about fisheye lenses as a lens in general. And I was thinking, does anyone use fisheye lenses anymore? How about you? Have you ever used fisheye lenses in any of your work? Do they have a fisheye lens in the staff room or in the gear room over in Tampa?
I personally detest fisheye lenses. I can't stand them. You couldn't pay me enough to put a fisheye lens on. Some people love them for very specific usages, in sports and all. For me, if I'm in a situation where I need to shoot ultra wide, which is very, very rare, but it does happen, I'd still much rather have a 14 or a 16 corrected lens than that fisheye distortion. But that's just my personal taste.
I mean,
there's nothing better for capturing a rugby scrum than a nice 8mm fisheye.
Oh yeah, you've done that?
No.
No. Have you used a fisheye in any of your work? I mean, maybe shooting some skate videos? Because that's the only thing I can think of for a good use of fisheye. No?
I like the artistic nature, but I've never used one.
Oh, okay. I played around with them.
Just for a trick toy.
Yeah. I played around with them, and yeah, it's the distortion. It's just, you get the fisheye effect, and it's, I don't know. It has to be like for a very specific purpose. Maybe you're shooting an extremely confined space. Having a fisheye inside, if you were shooting inside the helicopter, probably wouldn't be too bad. But yeah, no, I personally use a 7 to 14 millimeter, just regular wide angle lens for my camera. So I've never had a desire to have a fisheye personally, but I do think it's neat what they're doing here with this kind of, again, what was neat about this story is he built the lens himself. So I'd love to be able to build my own lens. I'd love to be able to have that skill set, but no. What's your lens kit made of primarily, Loren?
It's pretty simple. I've got a 24 to 70 f2.8 and a 70 to 200 f2.8 pair of zooms, and then a 35 1.4 prime and a 58 1.4 prime. And usually if I'm in a situation that's really, really fast moving where I need the flexibility of the zooms, then I'll have the 24 to 70 on one shoulder and the 70 to 200 on the other shoulder. And if I'm doing work that's, either really, really low light where having the f1.4 lenses is an advantage, or just more of a documentary sort of situation where I can zoom with my feet and, I'm not confined to, a press pen or something like that, then I'll rock the primes.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the primes, but again, when you're doing photojournalism, I don't think. I mean, some people do it and they get away with it and they're good with it, but I don't know. I can't imagine not having that versatility to be able to just kind of zoom in a little bit or zoom out a little bit to kind of get the perfect framing. So let's go ahead and move on to our last topic this evening. We're talking about female sports photographers, sports photographers we admire. Did you do much sports work, Tampa Bay, maybe some Tampa Bay Bucks or anything like that when you were in Tampa?
I did quite a bit of sports work when I worked at the newspaper in Tampa. I was very fortunate to get to cover the Buccaneers for 3 seasons. I was the Buccaneers beat photographer for 2 of those seasons. So that meant I was in charge of coordinating all the paper's coverage. So I was sort of the point of contact between the newspaper and the team for organizing the portrait shoot for the season preview, coordinating our teams for all the home game coverage, and then traveling to cover the road games. And in addition to NFL, I got to help out with our Major League Baseball coverage of the Rays, as well as NHL coverage of the Lightning. And there was a beat photographer for the Rays and a beat photographer for the Lightning. So, when they needed help for home games, or in the case of hockey playoffs, I would get to help out with that.
So have you covered pretty much every sport, or just those 3 major ones? Did you ever shoot any college sports or high school sports?
Ton of high school and college sports at the newspaper as well. College football was huge for us, so covered the Florida Gators quite a bit, as well as University of South Florida. A lot of high school sports coverage as well. I think the only thing I haven't covered probably is the NBA. Never covered the NBA. Yeah, Daytona 500 was a ton of fun in Tampa. That was
I bet.
Very visual.
That's great. Now, so you've seen a lot of different sports, and have you seen, many female sports photographers out while you were working, or was it mostly male?
It's certainly male dominated, unfortunately, and I think that's something that needs to change. But with that being said, the female sports photographers who I did cross paths with were, like, I would say just the women who are doing it are phenomenally talented. And all the ones that I befriended are also phenomenal people as well. I think that there are a few folks I respect more than the women who are kicking butt in sports photography because it is such a male dominated field. I can't imagine being in their shoes. I really respect the heck out of them.
Any particular women women photographers shooting sports that you want to give a shout out to, or perhaps their work that you particularly like?
Yeah, some photographers who, I've really drawn a lot of inspiration from are Elsa Garrison, as well as Maddie Meyer with Getty. I've got roots in Seattle. I did my undergrad there, and Bettina Hansen and Lindsay Wasson are a couple of fantastic sports photographers up in Seattle.
Yeah, this article here that actually Zach put on our Facebook page. You can go to the Around the Lens Facebook page to see the link, or you can go to our show notes after the show. Lists a lot of women photographers who are doing sports photography, who deserve to be recognized for their work. I'll just mention a few names here: Maddie Meyer, Laura Wolf, Elsa Garrison, Melina Myers. I mean, there's so many here. You can go check that out. All their Instagram handles are featured, and it's really just a magnificent set of work. And again, that's the great thing about photography is that I don't look at a photograph and think, oh, that's shot by a guy, that's shot by a woman. It's just a great picture. So it's great to see again all this great work being produced by a lot of awesome female photographers. Ron, do you shoot much sports over there in Hawaii?
We used to for the paper, and I don't do too much anymore for the TV station.
They're when not I was itching for sports content over in Eagle News.
Not a ton. They don't care about that too much. Whatever touches the Philippine community. If we had some Filipino sports star, I guess I'd be covering that kind of stuff. But I don't do that anymore.
Is there a popular sport in the Philippines? Like, is it just like soccer? Basketball. Okay.
Basketball, national sport. They love it. They love the Lakers, Michael Jordan. Oh. They love that stuff. That's the most popular sport. Regarding females in Hawaii, I don't know the lady's last name, but there was a girl I used to hang out with. Her name was Kathy. And when I'd shoot the boxing, she was famous for shooting boxing and MMA photography. And I was just looking online, see if I could find her last name so I could give her a shout out. I don't know if she's still doing it or not, because I'm not. I don't see her anymore. But
let me just Google lady photographing boxing and MMA. I'm sure they'll be the only one.
Kathy boxing photography Hawaii and Kathy MMA photography. I can't see anything. So I mean, I see a lot, but I don't know if it's her. Anyway, the point is, she was good, she was fine, and she was probably the only woman doing it. So, yeah.
Any of those sports? Did you ever shoot any boxing or MMA, Loren?
I've done some MMA. I don't think I've shot boxing, but shot MMA in Tampa as well as in Missouri, actually, when I was in grad school.
Oh wow! Is that easy to shoot or hard to shoot? Like how difficult is it to shoot MMA to get good?
Super challenging. I think the toughest thing about shooting MMA is that you're shooting through a cage.
Oh yeah.
So keeping your focus shooting through that cage is really, really tricky, especially as the action moves up against the sides of the cage, and you're shooting at a 45-degree angle, and so trying to focus, especially because you're using shallow depth of field because you don't have a lot of light, you want a pretty fast shutter speed to freeze the action, and so making sure that you're focusing on the fighters as opposed to on the cage a foot and a half in front of them is really tough. Sometimes you got to switch over to manually focusing, honestly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, I don't know how you could shoot something like that on autofocus, because there'd just be popping back and forth, and then it's like it'd be so frustrating to miss like some great moment because it focused on the cage, right then and there. But I have to imagine, like, nowadays, I mean, if you look at the innovations in focus technology, like Sony especially, they're doing great things with face tracking, eye tracking, and stuff like that. So maybe that could be sort of something to think about. I don't know. I think the Nikons actually have some pretty decent autofocus, especially with their new mirrorless setups. Would you ever switch from Nikon, or you'd Nikon diehard?
I'm not. I don't have any real loyalty to any brands. The Canon gear I used when I worked at the newspaper and started out freelancing. It was always dependable and reliable. There were just some specific needs that I wanted that I felt like Nikon was going to accomplish for me, that motivated me to switch over. But depending on where the mirrorless technology goes in the future, if the Nikon Z cameras, are the way to go, and maybe I'll do that. But if the Sony mirrorless cameras are leading the charge, then I'd consider moving that direction.
All right, great. Well, that pretty much ends this week's show. We blew through that one pretty quickly. But Loren, where would you like to send people to find out more information about your work and what you're doing?
My portfolio is LorenElliottPhoto.com. That spelling is LorenElliottPhoto. And then my Instagram is the same. It's Loren Elliott Photo. And Instagram might even be a better place to go if people just want to have a quick look at the sort of work I do.
As a freelancer, are you finding that you have to be more like present and aware and utilizing sort of social media to kind of promote yourself? Like, you see all the time these stories where, like the clients now want you to have like a specific following on specific platforms in order for them to hire you. Do you see that as being something that, agencies are looking at, or, your clients are looking at, like they want you to have that sort of following, or is it still based on, the overall quality of your work?
To be honest, it's really hard to tell from the seat I'm sitting in. The work I get is I think mostly due to the relationships I have with the editors who are doing the assigning. Now, whether those editors are, if they haven't had any work in my region for a while, whether it's seeing what I'm posting on Instagram that's making them think, hey, for this next assignment, I'm going to call Loren, or whether they're not even paying attention to what I'm doing on Instagram, I don't know. I don't have clients who tell me, hey, we want you posting on Instagram, or we want you having this certain following. I have to think that that the editors that I work for, when I'm not actively working for them, having them seeing work I'm doing for other outlets on my Instagram hopefully helps just to keep me on their radar and make sure that they're thinking about me. I don't know how big of a factor it is at the end of the day, but I'd rather have a presence and have it not be that helpful than not have a presence and have that hurt me.
That's right. I mean, you kind of have to have it nowadays, no matter what. So, especially in the photography field, yeah, you kind of have to be a part of Instagram. I don't know any other. There's no like rival Instagram that people really think about that that exists out there. So you kind of have to be a part of it. And for you personally, do you see freelancing being, obviously you've only been freelancing for what, about 2 years now? 2 years now?
Just over a year. I started maybe 13 months ago.
Oh, wow. So you just celebrated the first year anniversary of being a freelancer. Is this something you think you want to do for the foreseeable future, or are you looking at maybe going back into sort of full-time work, or maybe doing a different sort of career field altogether?
I certainly hope that I don't end up in a different career field. I'm pretty in love with photojournalism and covering the sort of stories that I get to cover right now. So if I'm fortunate enough, I'd love to cover immigration, politics, breaking news, that sort of thing, as long as I can. In terms of freelance versus staff, I think that there may be a handful of staff jobs that I'd leap at for sure, but they're the sort of jobs that don't come open often. So I'm certainly buckled up and ready to be a freelancer for the long haul. And if the right opportunity presents itself, I would make moves, but otherwise I'm ready to continue the freelance thing for quite a while.
Okay, great. Well, as we said in the beginning, maybe on or off the air, if you ever want to come out to Biloxi or come out to this area, you're more than welcome to, but knowing your luck, you'll probably get that big scoop as soon as you make plans to come out here. So enjoy the
appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the freelance life. Ron, anything going on with you that we need to know about? Any new stuff?
Loren, you're welcome in Hawaii as well.
Thank you, Ron.
Oh yeah, as soon as he buys that plane ticket, he's gonna get the call and be like, "Listen, awesome immigration story. We need you here for the next 3 weeks. You're gonna live on the border."
We're thinking about building a wall around Hawaii, so maybe you can cover that.
Who are you gonna make pay for that?
We're gonna make the fish pay for that one.
Oh, good, smart. That's the way to do it. And I would say, again, you cover the border. You're in Houston, Texas. That made me think, like, you can just drive to your shoots, right? Or is it still so far because it's Texas that you have to fly out to what you're covering?
I fly to most of that sort of regional work. Dallas is about my limit for driving.
Okay.
If something is like 3 hours or less, then I'll drive. For covering immigration stories along the border, I just fly Southwest out of Houston to either McAllen or Laredo or El Paso. They're all pretty easy spots to jump to.
And those are pretty close to the border in general?
Yeah, McAllen is right on the border, as is Laredo and El Paso.
Okay.
Brownsville, McAllen.
Was that what? Were you from there, or you been there?
It's just a border town. Brownsville, McAllen, they're sister cities.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you, Loren, so much for being a part of the show. I truly appreciate it. You're always welcome back on if you ever like to talk about any cool projects you're working on. Again, I want to remind all our viewers or listeners that you can contribute to Patreon. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook. We've got all the platforms available there. So love to see, again, some more supporters coming out and supporting the show. But again, thank you, Loren, for your time. For Ron Hamilton, I am David J. Murphy. This has been Around the Lens, episode 163, and we are out. Thanks for tuning into Around the Lens. We hope you enjoyed the show and hope you'll join us next week. In the meantime, go to AroundTheLens.com for show notes from tonight's episode, as well as links to our Patreon, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. We're also always looking for new and exciting guests to feature on each show, so if you know somebody who might be interested, let them know.